Welcome back to another segment of Behind the Scenes of the Waltons. Today, in this Ask Judy, I'm going to cover some aspects of life, real life versus fiction. So if you're enjoying these, please do hit like and subscribe. The first piece of real life information I have was shared with me by viewer Scott, so I want to thank you for sending this along. This is an article from the Richmond Times-Dispatch, Sunday, December 10th, 1972. So quite a nostalgic piece of newspaper information here. And this was by reporter Allison Griffin. And she interviewed Marion Hamner Hawkes, who was the real life Mary Ellen, John Boy's oldest sister. So I want to share with you some of this article so it gives you a little bit more information about what was real and what it was like for her to be the inspiration for my character of Mary Ellen. So it says here, when Mrs. Glenn Hawkes of Richmond watches the television series The Waltons on Thursday evenings, she often cries quite a lot. She's watching her childhood being lived all over again. Mrs. Hawkes, now the wife of a professor of psychology at Virginia Commonwealth University and the mother of 2 boys, was one of the 8 Hamner children of Nelson County about whom The Waltons was written. When they were talking about the episode The Minstrel, which was going to be aired very soon, of course, this was the first season of The Waltons, 1972. So it would have been very new for all of the Hamner family, the real-life Hamner family, to be watching their childhood reenacted. So regarding the minstrel, the tomboy Mary Ellen reaches the restless stage of girlhood when she is impatient to get away from home and she falls in love with a boy who plays a guitar. In fact, Mrs. Hawkes said in an interview, I did get away from home at that time. I entered the School of Nursing at the University of Virginia. But in the end, I became a medical secretary, and the boy I fell in love with played a trumpet. So, though every episode in The Waltons is not based on literal fact, Mrs. Hawkes said, the whole series really captures beautifully what our life was like. It's quite authentic. Many of the incidents really did happen, like when we had to sell the calf and when I sold Earl's, John Boy's typewriter to a junkman. It was a borrowed typewriter. So good to know that those 2 episodes were indeed based on real-life fact. Later on, she says, Mrs. Hawkes, Mary Ellen grown up, is a tall, slender, composed woman with a soft voice, just the kind of person you'd imagine had been raised by the gentle ma and pa of the Waltons. Mrs. Hawkes said that there were 2 sets of grandparents who played important roles in the Hamner children's lives, but the budget of the series wouldn't allow for such a large cast, so the grandpa and grandma of the Waltons were sort of composite of all 4 of their grandparents, she said. So, for those of you who've wondered how come we didn't see Olivia's parents, budget. How many times have I said that? Like, why? Where were the children? Where were the grandchildren? Where was John Curtis? Budget. Sad but true facts of making movies. And sometimes you have to make those compromises. It's like, well, can you do all of it? Is it better to do none of it or as much of it as you can and as your budget allows? And I guess our producers did their best to balance those 2 things and tell stories that the audience would enjoy. And if not, being able to reflect everything that happened and every character that we came to know and love. As the article goes on, she says, their father in real life was a machinist at the only industry in Schuyler at the time, the Alberine Stone Company. When he was laid off during the Depression, he worked very hard for very little money, doing things like cutting wood, his daughter said. So I really thank you, Scott. It was so fun for me to go back and read this article. I did have the pleasure of meeting Marion on a couple of occasions. She did come out to Hollywood, came onto the set, and we got to spend a little bit of time together. So I enjoyed getting to meet her, and she was indeed a lovely woman. I didn't get a chance to meet the rest of her family, but I hope that they have all enjoyed watching the show, and I know the brothers and sisters of Earl's that I have met really have enjoyed being represented through our depictions of the characters on The Waltons. The next of my sharing of real life and how real life sort of crossed with filmmaking, this was inspired by my conversation with David Harper. where we were talking about different things during the series, and he reminded me that one of our early makeup artists, Robert Sidell, Bob Sidell, had this connection to the actual movie Argo. And so it made me go doing a little research because I couldn't remember the details of this, just knew I'd heard them. So in researching around, I came across this article in the Hollywood Reporter that said the January 17, 1980 issue of the Hollywood Reporter was full of ads promoting that year's Oscar hopefuls. Amid all the hoopla, it was probably easy to overlook one relatively unassuming full-page black and white display ad announcing a new movie called Argo. In fact, there never really was a movie called Argo that was ready to go before the cameras, at least not in 1980. As the article continues, it says, as the 2012 Argo reveals, that trade ad for the 1980 Argo was part of an elaborate and daring secret CIA mission to rescue 6 U.S. State Department officials trapped in Iran during the 1979 hostage crisis. So this we know is true information. The Hollywood Reporter merely played along with the ruse unwittingly. But it all boils down to one line that a movie producer played by Alan Arkin delivers in the new film. If you want to sell a lie, you get the press to sell it for you. Affleck's movie, Argo, begins with the storming of the U.S. Embassy in Tehran by Iranian revolutionaries and the blessing of the Ayatollah Khomeini on November 4th, 1979. 52 Americans were taken hostage, but unknown to the Iranians, 6 others escaped and found refuge in the homes of the Canadian embassy's top officials. But even with newly issued Canadian passports, the 6 still needed new cover identities if they were to fly safely out of Iran. Clearly, this was also the basis of what the actual circumstances had been. So in real life, enter Tony Mendez, a CIA expert in exfiltration, who came up with an outrageous proposal. The 6 could pose as members of a Canadian film crew scouting locations in Iran. First, though, he had to set up a Hollywood facade, and so he turned to makeup expert John Chambers, winner of an honorary Oscar for his work in 1968's Planet of the Apes. The men had collaborated on secret projects in the past that relied on Chambers' expertise to provide disguises for CIA operations. So clearly, John Chambers had actually done work with the CIA in the past. So Mendez and Chambers were real people in real life that were then depicted in the movie. So continuing with the information about the real operations here. As the operation got underway in 1980, Chambers enlisted Robert Sidell, a makeup artist with credits ranging from the Waltons to E.T. the Extraterrestrial. Sidell didn't know about his colleague's CIA connection, but knew something was afoot as soon as he was introduced to Mendez, who asked him to sign a secrecy agreement. At first, I was floored. Then we got down to business, he says. If their production was to have any credibility, the newly minted producers needed a real script. As the movie tells it, there was a script called Argo sitting in the slush pile, which was perfect since its sci-fi setting required filming in a desert setting like Iran. The real story is more complicated. So, with $10,000 in financing from Mendez, Sidell and Chambers formed a production company called Studio 6, named for the 6 Americans in hiding, and rented offices at the Sunset Gower Studios in Hollywood. To make it all look authentic, they took out trade ads and began giving interviews. Sidell told the Hollywood Reporter that foreign financing was behind the film. When asked who he was planning to cast, Sidell, as if enjoying an inside joke, said, "We're sworn to secrecy on the names." Sidell recruited his wife, Andy, to handle the company's 3 public phone lines, plus one that was solely for incoming CIA calls. That line rang only once during the 3 weeks they were in the office, and when Andy answered the phone, a voice said, "They're out. It's over." The hostages were free. Argo then simply disappeared. Because initially it remained classified, we'd say, "It's not canceled, just postponed," says Sidell. So that is the story behind our former makeup artist, Bob Sidell, being involved in a CIA operation that served as the means to extricate those hostages, and also for the future film by Ben Affleck, called Argo. So if you haven't seen the movie, or it's been a while since you've seen it, you might go back and watch it again and look at how these sort of Hollywood and life can sometimes be stranger than fiction. I hope you enjoyed this slightly different version of Behind the Scenes of the Waltons with some real life information about the inspiration for the character of Mary Ellen, Marion Hamner Hawkes, and our little connection via 6 degrees of separation or whatever it is with the film Argo and our makeup artist Bob Sidell. I will be back with more Behind the Scenes of the Waltons and more Ask Judy, and who knows what else I might dig up as 2023 goes forward. Thanks for watching.